How many of you were here approximately 8 or 9 years ago when I visited your church? 1, 2, 3, 4. Fine. Now, I will be repeating what we said then with some additional things, but I suspect you have forgotten, those that were here before may have forgotten a little bit of what I presented, but that's all right. Let me take a few moments and just tell you how I got into this subject and how I began to share with others what I learned. About 1971, President Nixon went to China, opened up China. You all remember that. When he came back, the newspapers were filled with news, but the reporters that had gone there were really talking more about some of the medical things they ran into over there more than the political. Remember, that's when we first began to hear about such a thing as acupuncture. And one of the reporters had his appendix removed while he was over there, and so he had access to one of the medical institutions, and then they learned that, well, they were even at times giving anesthesia by acupuncture. A person they saw having a chest opened up while eating an apple and no pain medication and so forth, and the papers were filled with this story, and so it was a buzz all across the land. And as physicians, you were constantly asked about it, especially the anesthesiologist. I remember one of our anesthesiologists said, "Fine," he says, "I'm glad to do that for you. Shall we plan that on for you?" And he never got anybody to take him up on it. And so I began to wonder, what is this? The first thought that came into my mind, this is nothing but hypnotism. And I think most people in the Christian world, that's what went across their mind. But as time went along, more and more this came in, and great additional variety of medical therapies were being introduced, paranormal and so forth. The doctor's office would receive invitations for special programs to be presented and these things to be taught and so forth. And I kept looking at these. I says, I don't have a good feeling toward them, that I should be going to these programs, and yet I'm curious as to what it is. And between physicians, we would speak and talk. Nobody seemed to really understand it. My continued belief was it was a power of hypnotism. But as the years went by, over a period of 20 years, I wrestled. I was on one side and then the other, accepting and then rejecting. And I kept waiting for scientists to show us how it worked. And after 20 years, it still wasn't coming out as to how physiologically it could be explained. Well, there was a theory called a gate theory, that if you caused pain or irritation one place, it would block the pain from another place. This, I learned later, was put out concept by a neurosurgeon who was actually deep into the occult. He was trying to give an answer. But this was taken among medicine for a long time as being probably true. But yet then when you start using it for stop smoking and a whole variety of other things, it didn't pan out to be true. You couldn't explain it. And yet I was in a quandary. And at one point I can remember I was ready to accept that acupuncture may be doing something we just can't explain yet. And that's where most physicians are. If it works, who cares? That is the attitude. If it works, use it. We can't explain it, and that's all right. But I had deeper concerns, and so I never let loose and said to my patients, go ahead and use it. I was maybe not as vocal as I might have been advising them against it, because I needed something a little more solid to tell them. And then about in the mid-1990s, my brother loaned me a book he had, and it changed the whole course in my understanding. This little book called To Be One, TWO-B1, written by Ernest Steed, the father of Lincoln Steed. You know who Lincoln Steed is. He's head of our religious liberty for the General Conference. Well, it was his father, and actually Lincoln helped write this little book. I've visited with him about this. And that book gave me an understanding I had not had. I had read other books written by Christian authors and so forth that were putting forth their understanding of this subject, of the healing, some of these different healing modalities. But this book went to a depth that they did not comprehend. And it gave me the key that simply unlocked the mystery that thereafter I had no more qualms or no more hesitation to be able to say, I do not believe in this. There's another power involved, and it is not truly something that's going to be found to work on a physiologic basis as we understand things. But that satisfied me. I didn't have any oomph to go tell people. I was just satisfied myself, that's it. And about 5 years later, it was 1998, I received a telephone call from a Dr. Thompson, who was chairman of the board of 3ABN. He says, come be on a panel, we're going to discuss this subject. I had never heard of him. I knew of 3ABN, but I'd never heard him, and I was totally puzzled as to how he knew that I'd ever looked at the subject, because these 40 years I had been studying and reading and studying, trying to find an answer, but it got to a particular level, and that level was the same level that the medical science was, testing. If it really works, does something, then it's good, not how does it work. They'd like to know that, but if it works, it doesn't matter. Just like hypnotism, it was considered acceptable, good medicine, because it worked, it did things, no question. But whose power, of course, was our concern. And so I just kept quiet, but when he invited me to come to this panel, I was joined by Dr. Manny Vasquez, who was vice president of North American Division for all non-English speaking churches. He had written an article, a couple books on this. He had taken his doctoral degree at Andrews in this subject, not in the medicine aspect so much, but of the new neo-pagan movement that was coming through. And the three of us and Dr. Thompson were on this panel for 3 hours, intermittently half-hour sections. 2 months later, I was in Russia with my wife and her sister and husband, and we were at the division headquarters in Moscow, invited out to the college where the seminary was. And out there I was asked a question by the head of the publishing department. Somebody in their department had had stomach pain and got so bad he couldn't work. The doctors couldn't find an answer for it. And he went to some quasi-healer that manipulated and palpated his ear and made a diagnosis of stomach worms, parasites. They received treatment for the parasites. He passed the parasites, the ascaris, those big round worms. His pain went away and he's well. And so I was asked, what do you think of that? I says, well, I don't doubt that it happened, but this diagnosing from the feeling of the ear is based in astrology. Whew, I shouldn't have said that. The foreman of the publishing house there at the Zaoski blew up and was angry. He sat down, took his shoe off, showed me the bottom of his foot, says now there's 7,200 nerve endings down here and so forth and going on. And I said, well, that's based in the same thing, and that was worse. I just dropped the subject. I was embarrassed that I even brought it up. And of course, I'd been asked, and I told him my understanding, but it just blew up. And when I went home, I sent back the copy of the Dr. Vasquez doctoral degree. He had given me a copy. I made a copy, and I sent it on to the head of the publishing in American there. And a few months later, I got an email from him inviting me and wanting me to come conduct a seminar on this subject in Russia. And he says, I'm going to division level, and if they don't do anything, I'll do it myself. So soon I received from Nadia Ivanova, Director of Health Education for the division there, an invitation to come a few months later to help conduct a seminar on this subject for all of the health educators for each conference of the whole division, plus some additional physicians and dentists and so forth at the place in Nizhny Novgorod where the 3ABN Center is. So in 1999, I invited Dr. Vasquez, Dr. Thompson, Walter Thompson, and myself went to this location. We spent 2 days sharing with them our understanding, because this topic is motherhood in Russia. The doctors are taught these things that I will be exposing as a part of their medical training. You're dealing with deep-seated. And I thought, how am I going to deal with people that so believe? I don't speak their language. I'm a foreign doctor. And they believe in it all their life. Their mothers taught them and everything. And here I come in and tell them, maybe this is of the devil. But don't say it that way. That won't work. What am I going to do? Well, fortunately, that little book, 2B1, gave me the key by which I could start and lay the foundation, and then we had a successful 2 days sharing. That key I want to share with you. That key will be specifically more for the next hour, but let us take up our subject here at this time. The two great deceptions. The first one would be when in your judgment? The Garden of Eden. Now in heaven there had been a deception where the devil had dealt with the angels, but I'm speaking more of earth now. So here we have the great deception at the Garden of Eden. But before we get into that one, let's look at what the Bible had told through Moses to the children of Israel before they go into the promised land. Remember, 40 years wandering in the desert, the Lord trying to lead them, to teach them his ways. And now they're ready to cross the Jordan to go into the promised land. And Moses, not being allowed to go, the book of Deuteronomy primarily is his exposés as he shares with the people, serve the Lord, be true to him, and he will bless you. And so behold, he's saying, I set before you today a blessing and a curse. The blessing, if you obey the commandments of the Lord your God, which I command you today. And the curse, if you do not obey the commandments of the Lord your God, but turn aside from the way which I command you today, to go after other gods which you have not known. So here he's saying, you're getting ready to go in there. If you obey the Lord, there are blessings abundance. If you don't, it'll be a bad situation for you. And you and I know the history of what happened after that. And here, previous to this, he had written with his finger in a tablet of stone, you are not to have any other God except your Creator God. There were the other commandments, the first 4 relate to man's relationship to his Creator. The other 6 relate between our relationship one to another. But all in all, that is a ecology. In keeping those commandments, it brings about an ecology of others, benefiting of other people. Selflessness versus selfishness. Let's go on in Deuteronomy. He continues, you shall utterly destroy all the places where the nations which you shall dispossess served their gods. Not only the gods, but the places they served, on the high mountains and on the hills and under every green tree. You shall destroy their altars, break their sacred pillars, and burn their wooden images with fire. You shall cut down the carved images of their gods and destroy their names from that place. Even the names of the place was to be obliterated. There was to be no component of it to be in their society. So bad was this in the sight of God, serving other gods, that these were the instructions he gave. Before, these people were going to be literally obliterated because they were the fourth generation down following these patterns. And then we come to this particular session that really sets the stage for our comments today. When you come into the land which the Lord our God is giving you, you shall not learn to follow the abominations of those nations, that idol worship, all of the relationships to those idols. There shall not be found among you anyone who makes his son or his daughter to pass through the fire. Now they were sacrificing in this land of Canaan their children on the altar as burnt sacrifices. Probably also this passing through the fire, walking through the hot coals of fire, like today is felt so wonderful to do. What keeps people from being burned? There's a power there, isn't there? Oh, you can't deny that. Okay, there shall not be found among you anyone who makes his son or his daughter to pass through the fire, or one who practices witchcraft, or a soothsayer, or one who interprets omens, or a sorcerer, or one who conjures spells, or a medium, or a spiritist, or one who calls up the dead. He's trying to cover everything in this field with these terms. For all who do these things are an abomination to the Lord. And because of these abominations, the Lord your God drives them out from before you. Ye shall be blameless before the Lord your God. For these nations which you will dispossess, listen to soothsayers and diviners. But as for you, the Lord your God has not appointed such for you. Pretty strong comments. And so what today we're doing, we're going to be exposing the modern day equivalents of these things we have just named. Last night we gathered and we looked over and reviewed what the Lord has done for this people, our church, our members, over the last 150 years. In the beginning, when health education and what to do for disease and property were given to us, we seemed to be in odds with the medical profession down through the ages. When I started practice in 1960, we had nothing in the science that helped prove what we were teaching. By the time I quit, people were coming to me because of this knowledge. And it's greatly increased since that time, since that almost all of the advice that we have been given through time can be substantiated by present-day science. Nothing shown not to be true, but almost all of it actually subside. I spent 3 days here recently at an international congress on vegetarianism, held at Loma Linda, held every 5 years. This is the 7th session, 30 years' time that this has gone on. They started with very little response, kind of made fun of. Today, we had 800 people from 34 nations, researching scientists attending. And they tell me that in Europe it's exploding, this understanding that people. And what is the cause? What brings it out? We'll come to it later on there, but we need to move along more rapidly. Let's go to Daniel 2. Remember this story where Nebuchadnezzar forgot the dream. Daniel says, let me and my friends pray for this, and God gave him the same dream. But when Daniel went to the king, he pointed out, he says, these soothsayers, these enchanters, the Chaldeans, which were the priests of the religion, they weren't able to show you anything. But my God, the living God that created all, is capable. And today we're looking at a subject just like that. Into our church and into our country has come sweeping the powers, the same powers that Daniel had to deal with, and God gave to him the answer. And we want to show that God has given us the answer just like Daniel was given the answer. It was given 150 years ago, and it's as important today as it was the very day given. The Adventist health message we're going to review through here. Most of this is taken, we're just going to look at it, but much of it is taken from a book called The Story of Our Health Message by D.E. Robinson, and that's last night was the theme. But in 1848, the first message God gave, and this health message was to be the right arm of the message. And what we're going to be exposing is the right arm of the devil's message. And he's using it for that purpose. And it's worked like a charm. That's what we're dealing with. Our subject today is a subject that has to do with life eternal versus death eternal. Is that important? You may not have thought of that. But by the Bible and by the Spirit of prophecy, that's how important it is. All right. Our message to be the part of the third angel's message. It's a very integral part. And it's the health message given is in harmony with God's physical laws, but rejected by science till now, and it's been proven to be the best health guide there is. Now we're looking at what we call alternative. Alternative is something that's used till it becomes, quote, scientifically proven to be valuable. Then it becomes scientific medicine. So alternative is methods and approaches to healing that are not yet at this point shown to be up to snuff with all of the high degree of analysis as to whether it's true or not. But the ones we're looking at is not in harmony with God's physical laws, and its origin is out of a pagan pantheistic viewpoint. And we'll go back to ancient Babylon to recognize that at the 11 o'clock time. It is the right arm, and this message is the right arm for the missionary movement of neo-paganism that's sweeping through the world. And it has worked, as I mentioned before, very well, effective. And unfortunately, it's entered the church in a strong way, unrecognized, not by people saying, I don't care, not recognizing what it is. And so my purpose to share with you, as I sought to understand it, what I found, you take the message. If you don't believe it, that's your privilege. But I'm simply sharing with you what I learned. And the message I have shared, and those that have been deep into the occult came out and are in the church. Ministers, several of them are ministers, some others have reviewed my material, and they say, you're right on. Keep it up. So what I'm presenting to you isn't just out of my own mind. It's been reviewed by people that are experts in this field. Sorry on that. All right. We want to move along more rapidly now. This is alternative and mystical healing, not in harmony with God's physical laws. The origin we mentioned out of the pagan pantheistic doctrine. The right arm, the neo-pagan movement, extremely effective, and it has entered the church. And not a few in this Christian age and the Christian nation resort to evil spirits rather than trusting in the power of the living God. And that's why last night I wanted to tell the story of our health message, to see what it has done, how the world is looking at it and saying, how did you know this? And yet at the same time, some of us have turned and looked to the darkness rather than to the light. The mother watching by the sickbed of her child exclaims, I can do no more. Is there no physician who has power to restore my child? She's told of the wonderful cures performed by some clairvoyant or magnetic healer, and she trusts her dear one to his charge, placing it as verily in the hands of Satan, as if he were standing by her side. In many instances, the future life of the child is controlled by a satanic power, which it seems impossible to break. Rather sobering comment, is it not? Yes. Revelation 22, blessed are they who do his commandments, that they may have right to the tree of life, may enter in through the gates into the city. But But outside are dogs and sorcerers. Now, this word sorcery can actually cover all of this occultic activity. Those who do magic arts. The New International Version has that expression. Instead of sorcerers, it says those who do magic arts. And whoremongers and murderers and idolaters and whoever loveth and maketh a lie. For by their sorceries were all nations deceived. Remember, they don't have access through the gates into the city. Why? Because of their sorceries, and they deceived the nations. Neither repented they of their murders, nor of their sorceries, nor of their fornication, nor of their thefts. Sorcerers and idolaters and all liars shall have their part where? In the lake of fire, that which burneth with fire and brimstone, the second death, the permanent death. It's a pretty important subject we're looking at today. And so even if you have friends and so forth not here, hoping you have the opportunity to share with them. So we want to look at the two great spiritualistic deceptions. First, down at the Garden of Eden, remember the Bible says on the first day and things were made, and the next day it made, and then saw it was good. And at the end of the sixth day, he looked over everything. God looked over everything and says, behold, it's very good. And I wondered, what did he mean? What does the Bible mean when it says it is good? Created, it was good. Then it was very good. What was the meaning? So I looked in the dictionary, and this is one of the dictionaries. I found this. Good, to be in harmony with the moral order of the universe. Wow. I said, I'd like that. What is the moral order of the universe? And that's when we want to look a little more. Well, first, God created, through his Son, the created beings. And God's life, the actual life itself, comes out from the Father through the Son to the created beings in love, and back to the Son and back to the Father, the great circle of beneficence. This is the law of the universe. The 10 Commandments right here. Others. Selflessness. And what entered? Well, there was this great being then took on the sour countenance, shall we say. And he broke that circle. He wanted that love that was to go around the circle. He wanted to come to him. And so he broke this circle of love, which is the law of the universe. And throughout the rest of the history of the earth, all of the aspects of the devil's deceptions are involved in breaking that people, the created, giving back to the Son and to the Father the love that belongs to him. In the garden, there were certain principles that he used. And he uses those same principles in deception down through time. First, there was this location that they were not to go near. Does he tell us about some places not to go near? Satan's grounds? Yes. And so Eve ventured into the forbidden area, and then she made the mistake of doing a little dialogue. Once you enter into a dialogue with the deceiver, he's more powerful. He is much wiser, and he will win. And then the devil mixed a little deceit with a lot of truth. And Patriarchs and Prophets tells us that's the power of the devil, being able to mix a little error with a lot of truth. And it's so easy to deceive it. Well, look how good all of this is. But there's a bit of poison deep inside. All right. Now, the word spiritualism. He asked her, what did God say about eating this fruit? And she says, well, we will die. And he says, well, you won't die. The first lie. Yes. And then what more did he say? You will progress, become wise, progress toward godhood. Now, throughout my life, I've been in the church, in the schools, and we've heard a lot about the first one, that you don't die, but almost never do you hear anybody talk about you will progress to godhood. But that's the center core issue of this movement today. And if we get that, we've got the whole day's worth, wow, right now. That is where the deception comes. You shall become wise like a god. Signs of the times, May 29, 1901. He approached Eve, not in the form of an angel, but as a serpent, subtle, cunning, deceitful. With a voice that appeared to proceed from the serpent, he spoke to her, and his conversation was like the words which today wise and wicked angels speak through various agencies. Even Eve, as Eve listened, the warnings that God had given faded from her mind. Had you ever seen that particular quotation before? So when we get ourselves on Satan's ground, our protection leaves us. She yielded to the temptation. As she tempted Adam, he also forgot God's warnings. He believed the words of the enemy of God. The sin was the disbelief of God. Patriarchs and prophets makes that very clear. To not trust him. All right, now let's look at what was presented at this point. Lucifer in heaven, he says God's law is just not quite perfect. It needs a little twitching, a little tweaking, and I know just what it needs. God's law was selflessness. The ecology of heaven was everything for everyone else. God's love. And he says it needs a little tweaking, and what he had to tweak it with was selfishness. When man's nature changed, it changed from the nature of selflessness to selfishness. This is what happened. And the good stands for the love of God, which was selflessness. Evil, the opposite, stands for self. And this is the battle you and I have, is self. God won the battle with Satan. He gives us that victory. But we have the battle with self. And that is a difficult one. Lucifer's proposal for a superior system. And I want you to keep in mind this self, all the way through. Even if you come down to modern psychiatry and psychology, it's self-esteem, self-this. And you begin to see that it's gone down through the ages, that difference between selflessness and selfishness. At the cross of Calvary, this comes from Desire of Ages, love, and it should be God's love, and selfishness stood face to face. The love of God and selfishness stood face to face. God came, he descended from the high status to take on humanity, live this life that he lived, go through the cross, and he was faced, and this came about because of the selfishness. This is how far, and the universe looked on and says, well, now we know what will happen if we go that direction. Let's go to Babylon. After the flood, Nimrod started this city, and this is sort of a drawing at the time of Nebuchadnezzar, but long before Nebuchadnezzar. Remember, this was the city that had the tower, and they rebelled against God. The name of this city stands for rebellion against God's way. And in this ancient city, right early on following the flood, Nimrod and Semiramis, his wife, led the way, began to form a religion in contrast to God's plan of salvation. They rebelled. It became the cradle of the Oriental civilization and of pagan religions. And they took God's plan of salvation, and in all forms of it, they fit in their own system of worship, which is what we today call paganism. As it went to the entire world, each place then altered it a little bit, but it has the same basic core. It's a substitute for God's plan of salvation. The things we're going to be exposing are built upon that premise. Satan's theology, man possesses all the knowledge and wisdom of the universe. He is divine. He has divinity within him, and that divinity has access. It's the great universal wisdom. So that man has it within him. He just needs to learn how to bring it out. And the fruit from the tree of the garden was the first method, first modality, the first thing by Satan that was supposed to bring about the full potential of man, his divinity, rather than his connection with his Creator, It was some physical thing that would bring this to you. So here we go through some Bible verses that warn us what's going to happen at the end of time. Take heed that no man deceive you, for many shall come in my name, saying, I am Christ, and shall deceive many. Here Jesus was up on the Mount of Olives, disciples with him, and they said, tell us what's going to be the signs of this end of the ages. Well, you would think he said, well, there's going to be this great Armageddon, the battle, the clashes, and so forth. But what did he say? Take heed that no man deceive you. That's what we have to deal with, this deception. And he repeats this through there. Take heed that no man deceive you, for many shall come in my name, saying, I am Christ, and shall deceive many. The teaching out there today is each person is Christ, that is within you. For many shall come in my name, saying, I am Christ, and shall deceive many. Many false prophets shall rise, shall deceive many. And then if any man shall say, lo, here is Christ, or there, believe it not. Then Paul, writing to Timothy, says, now the Spirit says that expressly, in the latter times, some shall depart from the faith, giving heed to seducing spirits and doctrines of devils. I would like to think that I'm not going to be deceived. But as I look back through the years here, I can think how I actually gave in for a little while on one of these. And it's possible. What did Jesus say? That even, if possible, the elect, and I think it's possible. I know it is because I've seen it, and not realizing, and feeling that they're doing God's way. Revelation 16, and I saw 3 unclean spirits like frogs come out of the mouth of the dragon, out of the mouth of the beast, out of the mouth of the false prophet. Remember, this is the 6th, before the 6th plague. This is what prepares for that 6th plague. The 6th plague is the battle of Armageddon, which is the battle for your loyalty, who you're going to be loyal to. And it says, he saw here the spirits of devils, spiritualism, that goes to the whole world. Why? For they are the spirits of devils working miracles, which go forth unto the kings of the earth, to the whole world, to gather them to the battle of the great day of God Almighty. Do you have a clue that maybe we're in it right now? No question in my mind for myself. Each one decide for himself. Spirits working miracles. Now, I want to put a few moments looking at the word spiritualism, because so often we think of spiritualism as around a table, a dark room, spider webs, and people hands upon the table bouncing around, and maybe some materialization of some personage or something, or communications. Or we think of the Ouija board. But as we look at this, the definition of spiritualism, I took this out of Great Controversy, chapter 34, I believe it is. Man is a creature of progression toward godhood. Whenever you find that teaching and that philosophy in the background, you have spiritualism. Each mind judges itself. The judgment will be right. The throne is within it. All are unfallen demigods, little gods. Do you think that's the teaching around us today? I remember a few months ago, a reporter, a man with real esteem by most of the world, was talking about the people rioting. And he said, he had been there once, and he said, the problem is they think they're little gods. And I said, man, that man understands it. Well, that too. But that they are actual truly divine in gods. And he made that a real point. And I says, he had come out of this. So he knew what he was talking about. All right, divinity within. And that comes in many ways. The basis of almost all of the alternative therapies are built upon the precept of divinity within. And you are doing something to manipulate that divinity, whether it's poking a hole in your skin or standing in a position or so forth. It's divinity within is the basic core. Any just and perfect being is Christ. That's the teaching. The word expression, and I hate to even repeat it, but it's done over and over. They consider themselves the I am. I have a book taken by dictation from a spirit, and all the way through it's teaching you are the I am. Life continues after death. Reincarnation. Well, man, he says you don't die. God says you would, but the devil says no, you don't. And when man did, he had to fix that up, so you're supposed to come back around and around. He solved that problem. The communication is possible with the deceased, talking in tongues. Not the languages, but the babbling. God does not condemn. These are aspects of spiritualism. So as we look at, when we talk about spiritualism, we're not talking about that seance that many times we think about, or the knocking of these variety of phenomena. We're talking about some philosophy, things that are being taught about us and believed by the vast numbers about us, probably almost a majority anymore. And you're Menlo Park. Do you know where Menlo Park is? In the United States, that's the center of it. The leadership. In Scotland, there's a place called Findhorn that is kind of the Vatican. But in the United States, Menlo Park is the leadership. Spiritually conditioning by the mass media, education, channeling, movies, games, comics, it's everywhere. Getting us used to thinking in these terms. You know, the movie, the one that, about the cosmic wars, what do you call it? Star Wars. That's one of the strong ones for this. I have never seen it. There's a book called The Aquarian Conspiracy, written in 1980 by Marilyn Ferguson, which is kind of the manifesto for the neo-pagan movement that was just getting started good at that point. And that book has been so accurate. And out of that book we have here, I've taken mentioning the variety of things that she's talking about that leads people in to change their worldview to the world pantheistic worldview, from the Judeo-Christian to the pantheistic. And these are the things. Let me just read some of them. Of course, astrology, the horoscopes, psychic readings, the tarot cards, pendulum divination, transcendental meditation, guided imagery, channeling, Ouija board, occult computers, the occult symbols, and on and on. Holistic health is a big one. As spiritualism more closely imitates the nominal Christianity of the day, it has greater power to deceive and ensnare. Through the agency of spiritualism, miracles will be wrought. Not fake ones, but miracles. Well, I can tell whether it's of God or of the devil. If I get better, that tells me it's from God. Is that a good way to judge? Zero. You can never use whether you get better or not as a part of the judgment as to where it's from. If you are, you're dead in the water. You've had it. Miracles, and she says real ones, not just fake. Now, there are times many times he makes people sick and then removes it. But also the miracles. Through the agency of spiritualism, miracles will be wrought, sick will be healed, and many undeniable wonders will be performed. And as the spirits will profess faith in the Bible, manifest respect for the institutions of the church, their work will be accepted as a manifestation of divine power. Paul, in his second letter to the Thessalonians, points to the special working of Satan in spiritualism as an event to take place immediately before the second advent of Christ. Speaking of Christ's second coming, he declares that it is after the working of Satan with all power and lying wonders. We're in that day. We're in that day, make no mistake. And they are the spirits of devils working miracles, which go forth unto the kings of the earth, the whole world, to gather them to the battle of the great day of God Almighty. Except those who are kept by the power of God through faith in his word, the whole world. How many? The whole world will be under spiritualism. Except those that through faith in his word will be swept into the ranks of this delusion. People are fast being lulled to a fatal security, to be awakened only by the outpouring of the wrath of God. Just a bit more. The last great delusion is soon to open before us. Antichrist is to perform his marvelous works in our sight. So closely will the counterfeit resemble the true that it will be impossible to distinguish between them except by the Scriptures. I got better, so that proves it. And that's the only thing in 20 years of presenting seminars that I've heard. Well, I know it's true because I got better, and that proves it. Nobody's challenged me on anything else on the points here. So don't let that be a conviction. No question, if you are hurting and now you don't, it's pretty strong temptation. Make no mistake. The Antichrist to perform his marvelous works in our sight so closely will the counterfeit resemble the true that it will be impossible to distinguish between them except by the Scriptures. Now, I'm going to throw out a challenge to you. Some of the things we're going to look at later, church time and then in the afternoon, how you deal with them, how you challenge them by the Scriptures. How do you deal with yoga by the Scriptures or acupuncture by the Scriptures? Think about this. Every testimony, every statement, and every miracle must be tested by the Scriptures. The sciences of phrenology, psychology, and mesmerism. Phrenology is where they'd feel the head and say, well, you've got a certain problems hither and yon, and they'd put pressure on the points of the head to correct it. Psychology was the beginning of psychology. Then it was almost all of the psychologists were spiritualists, and especially the basic ones that bring us our present-day secular psychology were deep into the occult. And mesmerism was hypnotism. She says these have been a channel through which Satan has worked in the late 1800s and in the 1900s, early beginning. But today, the same power is present, but under different forms and practices. Now, phrenology, they would put this cap on the head and screw the screws down, and they'd put it on, and then it would make pressure on certain spots, supposed to change your personality or change your illness or whatever you had, wherever. This is being practiced today. You have it? Yes.
There's a Christian, they've been born again. They're in the Word of God. They're serving God. They're in the church and they're being a Christian. And they don't know about all this stuff.
That's true.
And they go in and they get acupuncture done because their doctor refers it to them. They know nothing about philosophy. They don't believe in garbage. And they go in and get that treatment. You're telling me that's bad?
It doesn't change what they believe. What is true and what isn't is there. But how do you deal with a person that has that belief or gets better is a difficult one, isn't it?
No, I don't think you heard my question.
Yeah.
A Christian.
Yes.
They have no idea about, foreign gods or other beliefs. They're like two-generation Christian and are just met the Lord. They've been with them, knowing the Lord and learning about the Lord for maybe a year or something. And their doctor refers them to go in and get acupuncture. They know nothing about the philosophy or falsity, the spiritualism behind it.
Yes.
And they go in and they get the treatment. They're totally ignorant of anything else except for God at that point. They weren't into any kind of spirituality.
And your question on it is?
Is that wrong?
Remember, the Lord winks at certain times, blinks where they are not. We are held accountable for what we can learn, where we are at the time, and the opportunity. If we reject the opportunity to learn, we're held accountable. But God blinks at the ignorance, but as time goes along, and they run into that and have a decision at some point, that's when
Right, well, you're really seeking the truth, and then that comes up. You need to choose the right.
Right. And this is why I have been for 20 years trying to share this. I thought when I got started I would be invited everywhere because people would want to know, but it's been pretty much the opposite. It's people don't want to know. They don't interfere with my practice, and it's this serious. It costs life eternal, and so I continue. Let me close out here. This psychology is on self, and it starts back there at the garden. Self-esteem, psychoanalysis, collective unconsciousness. Freud and Jung were deep in. Freud was not into the occult, but he was in certain ways later got into it. But Jung was a deep one. Even his very philosophy, he tells us that a spirit guide helped him form it. So this tells you what psychology is. And Carl Jung there, a spiritualist, he had this spirit guide that would walk with him in the garden and talk with him and so forth. Mesmer, the hypnotism, our church doesn't seem to have much problem recognizing and wanting to avoid hypnotism. Sometimes it comes in forms I don't know what is there. There was one called neuro-linguistic programming that ran through the ministry here a few years ago, and it was nothing but pure hypnotism.
How about that brand?
So what?
Brand, the eyeball, where they do treatments and they...
I'm not familiar with that particular name on there. Then as we have reached the perils of the last days, some shall depart from the faith, giving heed to seducing spirits and doctrines of devils. Be cautious in regard to what you read and how you hear. Take not a particle of interest in spiritualistic theories. Satan is waiting to steal a march upon everyone who allows himself to be deceived by his hypnotism. We're told that all of the things that he does is the same power as hypnotism. So it's all the same. It's all hypnotism. It's his power over the mind. He begins to exert his power over them just as soon as attention, and they start looking for these theories for themselves to solve it. So this brings us to the conclusion here. We will deal in the following service, opening a little more and a little more detail, that key that opened the lock that solved my confusion for 20 years. And it was so simple, and I am so grateful. Shall we ask the Lord's blessing? Our Father, as we have discussed this morning, these practices, these beliefs that can lead to the loss of our eternal life, we ask for your presence. We ask for our angels to be about us. Help us remember those principles that will help us stay clear, and that we may be able to share with someone else the danger that therein is. This we pray in the name of Jesus. Amen. Thank you.
All right, we have a